day of...
Kate Bailey. Tonight, a special edition of our program examines Robeson County, a place where poverty, distrust, and violence have become a public issue. State Line reporters Chris Fitzsimon and Jill McSweeney worked several months to bring you this in-depth look at a county on the brink. One word of caution, this program is about violence and a murder, and some of the language may not be suitable for younger viewers.
Robeson County looks at first like any other county in eastern North Carolina. Natural beauty of the land and the water that's so plentiful. Old homes on tree-lined streets, acres and acres of corn and tobacco. But a closer look reveals some characteristics that aren't so typical and aren't so beautiful either.
Robeson County is one of the poorest counties in North Carolina. Its poverty can be traced primarily to a dependency on tobacco farming and a lack of emphasis on education. Many people here have never developed skills for any jobs but farming.
In many ways, Robeson County is like what we would regard as a third world country or county. We have a high percentage of ethnic minority people. In fact, the majority of the county is ethnic minority, a high level of poverty. Most of the capital that is produced from agricultural and from industry leaves the area. So the profits largely leave the area. The wages that are received from industrial and agricultural jobs are very low. In fact, the lowest in the state.
There's something else that makes Robeson County different and makes it harder for the people here to overcome their poverty.
In days where two races have trouble getting along, there are three races in Robeson County: whites, blacks, and Indians, all vying for jobs, education, and economic opportunity.
When you've got a fragmented county this way, everybody's pulling against everybody else. They never pull together for the common good of the county. A lot of jealousies. What this race or this locality gets, we don't get. Instead of looking at it that the county gets this. It's like hitching up a wagon 5 different ways and pulling at it from all 5 angles.
Robeson County's poverty and prejudice are complicated by another problem: drugs. Robeson County's easy access to the coast and a major north-south highway like I-95 make it a prime location for cocaine distribution. The extent of the drug problem in Robeson County depends on who's talking about it. On one side, there's people like civil rights attorney Bob Warren, who believe Robeson County is a major drug distribution center.
We've had estimates of the amount of cocaine being sent through Robeson County anywhere from 20 kilos every week of 10 days to 100 kilos every week of 10 days.
On the other side, there are state law enforcement officials who agree there's a problem, but disagree on its scope.
Some major drug dealers have gone to jail. There's still some other cases pending. And, you know, that area has a significant problem, but it's shared with other places in North Carolina and the nation.
People like Bob Warren, who believe Robeson County is a major drug center, allege either direct involvement by local law enforcement or at the very least a hands-off approach to the drug trade. In mid-1986, a large amount of cocaine confiscated by the Sheriff's Department mysteriously disappeared from the evidence locker. In November of 1986, the sheriff's son, Deputy Kevin Stone, shot and killed an alleged drug dealer, Jimmy Earl Cummings. Cummings, an Indian, was unarmed. Jimmy Earl Cummings' mother is still bitter about the investigation into her son's shooting. The family got less than 4 hours' notice of the coroner's inquest.
Why couldn't they let us know the day before that or the day before we're going to have Jimmy Earl inquest a Thursday night, a Friday night? Why didn't they come a Thursday, a Wednesday, and told us that they were going to have it, and so we could have got us a lawyer?
The coroner ruled the shooting was either accidental or self-defense. That ruling outraged the Indian community, and for the first time, Indians, blacks, and whites protested together. From that point on, any death or murder in the county raised suspicion. It was as if the poor and frustrated had finally found a cause, right or wrong, to believe in. They now had a crusade, and it kept building. The allegations, the suspicions, the paranoia, the fear. Threats seemed to give credence to those feelings. This threat was made against a Durham newspaper reporter who wrote a story about the county.
Julian Day is going to die.
American drug addicts.
Fear and desperation turned into violence February 1st, when 2 Tuscarora Indians seized the Robisonian newspaper in Lumberton and held 20 employees hostage. Eddie Hatcher and Timothy Jacobs claimed their lives were in danger because they had information linking local law enforcement officials to drug trafficking in the county. The hostages were released unharmed after Governor Martin promised to send a task force to investigate the claims of corruption. The task force still hasn't found any evidence to back up the charges. But last month in Raleigh, a federal jury made it clear they believed Hatcher and Jacobs' story by finding the 2 men innocent of all charges in the incident.
Things seem to be changing after the hostage incident. The county voted to merge the 5 Robeson County school systems into one district. Indians and blacks turned out in record numbers, hoping the merger would equalize educational opportunities for all races. But the greatest hope hung on Indian attorney Julian Pierce, a candidate for Superior Court judge. Pierce's opponent was Robeson County District Attorney Joe Freeman Britt. Britt is serving his 4th term as DA and has faced criticism from minorities for years. They claim he manipulates the court calendar to force guilty pleas and forces defendants to spend weeks, sometimes months, waiting for their cases to be called. Pierce made the court system a major issue in his campaign.
There are a lot of folks I run into while I'm out campaigning that's had experience with our courtrooms and systems in Robeson County, and they're displeased with how overcrowded the docket is, how many times they had to go to court without ever having their case heard. They may be just witnesses.
Those same people that worked on the merger issue were behind Julian, and they saw a new day for Robeson County to have not only an Indian judge, but a fair judge, a judge that across the board was going to go in and the corruption was going to end, and he was a real threat.
Before he officially announced his candidacy in February, Pierce's supporters say he was asked not to run.
Julian was approached and asked to drop out of the race.
And what was his reaction to that?
Definitely not interested.
He was approached. He told me he was approached by a gentleman from Lumberton, and the deal was this, that he not file for the judgeship, give it to Joe, let Joe have it for 2 years, that Joe had something else that he wanted to go on to, and then at the end of the 2 years, he would see that Julian got to serve the balance of the term, that he would make sure Julian would get appointed. I mean, just the whole suggestion of that thing was just repulsive to him.
The Joe Ruth Locklear is referring to is Robeson County District Attorney Joe Freeman Britt, who did not return our phone calls or respond to our request for an interview. Pierce refused the offer. His campaign continued building momentum.
He came by the office, and I asked him, Julian, what you been doing? He says, oh, he says, I've been out beating the bushes. And he says, you know what, Christine? He says, this campaign's getting bigger than me. I think even Julian was frightened at how people were rallying to him, how people were just gathering to him as a measure of hope. Finally, at last, someone is going to help us. We have hope.
Hope that ended early one March, Saturday morning. Pierce's cousin, Charles Locklear, came over to help him put up campaign posters.
And as I reached to turn the knob, it was unlocked. And as I opened the door, I was speaking to him or calling out to him and looked, and that's when I saw his body lying over here.
Julian Pierce had been shot 3 times with a shotgun, once in the chest, once in the side, and a 3rd time at point-blank range behind the ear.
And my immediate thoughts was, you know, somebody's coming here, has been paid to shoot him, and that's what's happened.
Immediately after the murder, law enforcement officials called it the work of a professional killer and reported they were following leads outside Robeson County. Then 2 days later, Sheriff Hubert Stone announced the case was solved, that Julian Pierce was the victim of a bizarre domestic dispute involving Pierce's girlfriend, Ruth Locklear, her daughter Shannon, and Shannon's boyfriend, Johnny Goins. The murder weapon, a 12-gauge shotgun, belonged to Goins' best friend, Randy Chavis.
Goins was going with Julian Pierce's girlfriend's daughter, and Goins thought that Pierce had something to do with these warrants being issued against him and breaking him and his girlfriend up.
Ruth Locklear had taken out trespassing warrants on Johnny Goins 5 days before the murder, after Goins paid her daughter one of many late-night visits. It's clear from his friends and relatives that Goins was a troubled man the last few days of his life. He was living with Shannon in this apartment in Raleigh and attending Wake Technical College. But the two had argued the week before Pierce was killed, and Shannon moved back home with her mother. Shannon and Johnny reportedly reconciled in an 88-minute phone call the following Thursday. Shannon says she promised to move back to Raleigh and to meet Goins Friday the next night at Pedro's, a popular night spot just across the border in South Carolina. Shannon never talked to Goins again. Soon after he arrived in Robinson County that Friday night, he found out the authorities had been to his mother's house to serve the trespass warrants. So he headed back toward Raleigh, and this is when law enforcement officials say he entered what they describe as a covert mode. About 9:45 that night, Goins called the Chavis house and said he had gotten his car stuck. Randy wasn't home, so Randy's twin brother Sandy and his sister Renee went to get Goins out.
We pulled on back there because the road had been disted. So that, you can tell, you know, the dirt, it was sand. And got back there, and I said, Johnny, what the hell are you doing back here? And he said he had to take a leak, and he couldn't afford to be seen side the road.
Goins finally headed to Raleigh that night about 11 o'clock and wasn't heard from again until almost 2 hours later. About 12:45 Saturday morning, Goins drove up behind the Chavis house and picked up Sandy.
He came in, he went straight to the bathroom. And I said, Johnny, is that you? And he didn't answer me. He said, normally Johnny would say, yeah, nay, and come on around where I was at, because my door was open. The only thing I understood him to say is, get up and let's go meet those girls. And Tan grabs his shoes. I heard him pick up the shoes. And they left, and they were giggling as they left out, you know, around the house.
Law enforcement officials believe this is when Sandy Chavis and Johnny Goins drove to Julian Pierce's house, and Goins committed the murder. No concrete time of death has been established, but some investigators estimate it at between 12:30 and 1:30 early Saturday morning. It's unclear exactly what happened next, but apparently Goins dropped Chavis off somewhere near his home. At about 3:30 that morning, Ruth Locklear says Goins showed up at her house looking for Shannon.
And I tell him that Shannon's not there, and he's very nice. He's very calm. And after a while, he says, well, what is this about you taking out these warrants on me? What is this about trespassing and communicating threats? And at that point, I realized that he was getting upset. And I told him, I said, Johnny, we don't need to be having this kind of conversation. It would be best if you leave and go on. He said, you EMF, SOB, I'm going to kill you.
Goins then continued looking for Shannon, going to two of her friends' houses. About 4 o'clock, he got his car stuck again, and this time Randy and Sandy went to help him.
I was holding the door open for him to get in. That's when I saw the gun. I saw a gun. I couldn't tell you whose gun it was. I couldn't say it was mine. They're saying it's mine. I ain't gonna say it's mine. All I seen was the barrel.
Where was it?
Barrel of the gun. It was behind Johnny's seat, the driver's seat.
Goins went back to Raleigh on Sunday and spent most of that day on the telephone talking about the warrants.
He said, Jimmy, he says, I'm so depressed, I don't know what to do. I says, what are you talking about, Johnny? He says, you heard about the warrants? I said, yes. Mother and father called me last night around 10:30, 11 o'clock that Friday night and told me Ruth had a trespassing warrant. And I laughed. I said, boy, don't worry about it. I said, come on here, let's watch the ball game. We'll go down to Pembroke to the magistrate and take care of it. He said, what do you mean? I said, there's nothing to it. He said, Jimmy, I've been told I'd get 25 to 30 years.
Johnny Goins made 28 long-distance phone calls that day. Most of the conversations were about the same two subjects. His friends say he mentioned Shannon and the warrants. Randy Chavis remembers he also mentioned the Pierce murder.
He happened to ask me what it had in the paper, you know, about Julian's killing, you know, what it said in the paper. I just told him, I says, this got leads out of the county and out of the state. And that was all. But I also, you see, I come up and asked him point blank. I said, Johnny, I said, you know what we're thinking? He said, what, Rand? I said, did you kill Julian? He never questioned me. He never, you know, held back when he said or anything. He just said, no, Rand, I didn't. You know, me and him being so close, he said, what? You know, what are you know, insinuating or something like that? He never questioned. It was smooth when he said it. No, Rand, I didn't. I said, John, you had to have a motive. You didn't like the man. You know, I said, you could have thought he was keeping y'all apart or something, or he's the one had to do it. He said, Ran? I knew. I said, Johnny, I seen the gun. He said, Ran, when I took the gun, I'd plan on coming back to Raleigh and blowing my damn brains out.
The next day, Monday, law enforcement officials were closing in on Goins as a primary suspect, charging him with first-degree murder. They found his fingerprint in blood at Pierce's house and had a statement from Sandy Chavis implicating him and Goins in the shooting. Chavis also was charged with first-degree murder. When Goins drove back to Robeson County early Tuesday morning, authorities were waiting for him at this church, and after a 4-hour chase, found him dead in a closet in his father's house. The death was ruled a suicide. Many friends and relatives of Pierce and Goins accepted the official version of the deaths at first, but as the shock wore off, suspicions took its place, and talk of a law enforcement cover-up began.
You know, it just seemed like they were trying to wrap up the case too quick for me.
They definitely wanted us to believe that that was all there was to Julian's death. 2 boys went in and killed him, you know. And if there had been a good motive, maybe I could have lived with that, you know. But to me, I haven't seen a good motive yet.
If the Robeson County rumor mill was busy before with allegations of official corruption and involvement in drug trafficking, it exploded in the wake of the Pierce murder. Civil rights groups hired private investigators and investigative reporters popped up. Literally hundreds of leads flowed into the State Bureau of Investigation offices, and even more were heard on the streets. Most had no foundation in fact, but a few persisted, and still persist to this day, 7 months after Pierce was killed. The most common rumor is about a footprint in blood just outside the door at Pierce's house. The man who found the body saw it.
The footprint I saw was a small track, and it was made something, the groove of the track was across the foot instead of long ways with the foot, and it was a small track. When I say small, size-wise I don't know, but it was a small track, and the grooves were across the foot, and our foot, we didn't have any grooves at all. All we had was just a flat track.
Locklear says the print wasn't complete, that the heel portion was missing. But his description of the footprint spurred many theories that someone else was in the house with Goins. Locklear said the print was narrow, so many assumed it was a woman's. And no woman with ties to Pierce was immune from accusation, even the one closest to him.
It's bad enough that he's dead and killed and so shot down like that. You have to go through that. And then 2 days later, I was having to go through another funeral with Johnny Goins, who my daughter was attached to. So you have to live with all of this, plus you have to deal with rumors out there that somehow you're involved in.
A law enforcement source close to the investigation says that footprint was actually more of a smudge. He did say it appeared to have been made by a shoe with a tennis shoe type sole, but there wasn't enough detail to determine its size or whose print it was, much less if it was made by Goins or Chavis. People not only believe there is evidence that doesn't fit the official story, they think local law enforcement officials were directly involved in the murder. This belief began the morning of Pierce's memorial service.
I was visited by a lady, relative of mine, credible person, and she told me that she had spoke with someone, also a credible person, and they had witnessed a law enforcement car at Julian's house at the trash dumpster, excuse me, at 12:30 that night.
Ruth Locklear gave Governor Jim Martin this information that day. The governor's office later confirmed there was a law enforcement car in the area that night, but said it was on routine patrol. And a source close to the investigation says it was a deputy sheriff who stopped several people that night. This lady was one of them. She was headed home through this field across the street from Pierce's house between 11 and 11:30.
And about halfway between you and the highway, he stopped us, pulled his blue light and asked for our driving license and asked us where we were going, and I told him I was going home. He said, "There ain't no house back there." I said, "Yes, it is. I've been back here all my life." And he said, "Well, go ahead then."
And has anything like that ever happened before?
No, they ain't never been there back here.
Despite the routine patrol explanation, there are still those who wonder, was it just coincidence that this woman was stopped on the way to a house she has lived in for 50 years, the same night Pierce was murdered? Pierce reportedly had information about drug trafficking and corruption in the county. That leads many to think there was more to his murder than just a domestic dispute. A prominent Indian attorney in Washington, Arlinda Locklear, says Pierce visited her 2 weeks before he was killed and told her he had information about the drug trade in the county. And Pierce's own children say he mentioned it to them.
He said that he was doing an investigation. He didn't talk to us much about it, and we really don't know anything for a fact that we could say.
He didn't say whether it was drugs.
He said it dealt with it.
One of the main pieces of evidence that law enforcement officials are relying on is a statement Sandy Chavis gave them on Tuesday morning after the murder, when he admitted that he and Goins went to the Pierce house and Goins committed the crime. Family members say Chavis had been drinking the night he gave that statement. In fact, he's been treated for alcohol abuse. Chavis' actions and stories the day after the murder show he knew a great deal about what happened at Pierce's house that night. His family says he knew because Goins told him. Law enforcement officials say he knew because he was there. Here's what Chavis told his mother.
He said Johnny told him, you know, about killing, how he killed Julian and everything, what Johnny said, but he said he didn't believe it. He said, if you're going to kill yourself, go kill yourself in front of Shannon. And he said he talked him in coming back, you know. And Johnny said he'd go do it. I mean, you know, he'd go over there, and sure enough, they said he went. I don't know, you know. He went to Ruth's house.
If I'd know for sure that Sandy would have had anything to do with Julian Pierce's killing, I wouldn't help him not one lick. But the kid is innocent. He hadn't done anything, only just befriended a friend after the fact.
But Chavis told a different version to his estranged wife the morning after the murder when he showed up driving Goins' car.
Okay, I got in the car and I asked him, I said, Sandy, where'd the blood come from? He says, never you mind. Me and Johnny went off and got in some argument last night. He wanted a sponge. I said, what do you want a sponge for? Is, you know, to wash the car out and all that stuff.
What do you mean, wash what out?
The blood, and, you know, wash the blood up. And we never got a sponge, so we came back to my mom's house. We got her. I asked her for a rag, and she gave me a rag. And Sandy, and I reckon Kim Jr. helped him, you know, clean, you know, mainly the, you know, the rough, heavy blood up and stuff.
Law enforcement officials say the blood in the car came from a cut on Goins' hand. A cut he received, they say, breaking the glass on Pierce's door the night he committed the murder. But the most difficult thing for many people to understand is how Johnny Goins could have committed such a brutal act. The person who may have known Goins best, his girlfriend Shannon, who declined to go on camera, says Goins had a temper but wasn't prone to violence. Others say they don't believe Goins was a good enough shot.
And it would take a very good shot to be able to shoot Julian one time in the chest, and then as he's turning, to get the gun that close on his side and shoot him there. And then to finish it off with a shot in the back of the head is just a signature of a hitman. And it just doesn't make sense that Johnny Goins would have been able to be that hitman.
But there were people who thought of Johnny as a suspect not long after the murder, including his best friend Randy and Shannon's mother, Ruth Locklear, who thought of Johnny when she heard Sandy Chavis was involved. Goins had given Ruth a reason to suspect him. Once, after Pierce and Ruth visited Goins' parents about his relationship with Shannon, Goins waited for Pierce at his house, but Pierce never came home.
He said he went there waiting for him one night.
He said he did?
Yeah, he told me he did.
Did he say he had a gun that night?
No, he never said.
Goins' final act in the bizarre 3 days guaranteed two things. Many questions would never be answered, and many more would be asked, this time about his own death. Authorities chased Goins for several hours early Tuesday morning in Robeson County, at one point concentrating their search on his father's house and the woods nearby. Goins somehow managed to get by them and into the house. He was found dead in a closet, the victim of a shotgun wound to the head. Authorities immediately ruled it a suicide. But those who doubt the story of Pierce's death also believe Goins could have been murdered. Dr. Charles Garrett, an expert on shotgun wounds, says Goins most likely killed himself.
That means that barrel was tight up against the head. It's in the right temple. It's in an area in which most right-handed people commit suicide. I don't think I've ever seen a hard contact gunshot wound to the head that wasn't suicide.
Sheriff Hubert Stone and District Attorney Joe Freeman Britt declined to be interviewed on camera for this story, but Stone did say the Pierce investigation was the most thorough investigation he'd ever been a part of. Stone is frustrated by the continued allegations of corruption made against his department. None of these charges have been proven. He blames them on a small group of Robeson County residents who he says are being influenced by outsiders. Stone did let us talk to one of his deputies who shares the sheriff's frustrations about the attacks on the department's integrity.
Well, those accusations I pay no attention to because I know it's not true. Since I've been with this department, I've never been offered a bribe or anything like that. Where I feel that there's a problem is these outside lawyers coming in Robeson County. Even the media at times come in on accusations and allegations that have been made, and they just, it is misinterpreted, and the reputation of a great county is just tarnished. That's the way I feel.
But maybe the blame can't be placed on just outsiders or a core group of dissidents, if there is such a thing. Suspicion and distrust find fertile ground in Robeson County. Some of the people here for so long have had nothing else to turn to.
I think if there's anything we got a right to be pointing a finger at is the lack of opportunity that these people have not had over the years to economically develop. I have never seen an instance in all of my business career that I couldn't identify a man's misfortunes due to his lack of material gain or opportunity. And if you take that away, as far as I'm concerned, you'll take away the problem. Until you do take it away, you can feel as sorry as you want to. You can replace that sheriff with a dozen others. And it will not change the basic concept of a man's mind that he didn't have a chance.
The charges of corruption, the questions about who killed Julian Pierce, or why there are still reports of drug trafficking may remain questions in the minds of many.
If there were no questions about these issues, there would be questions about others. The underlying problems in Robeson County are much deeper, much darker, and much harder to answer.
The fear is very, very deep. The difficulty becomes separating fact from fiction. And the fear is so deep that not only do people fear those who make decisions over their lives, but also their neighbors and their family members and people in the community, and every community leader themselves are suspect. So the fear becomes so cyclical that it's so easy for people to get wrapped in that web of fear that they can't see a way out. And what we must begin to do is use the wisdom of our minds and hearts and document what is fact and what is fiction, and begin to slowly move forward in spite of the fear.